Hello, Gen Mex. I'm in Sayulita, which is definitely a laid-back town, and we are going to be meeting the busiest laid-back guy in Sayulita in this video. We're going to introduce you to George, and George is going to share typically his story of how he ended up here in Sayulita. Also, we're going to see his place and get a tour, hear how much he paid for it. Also hear a little bit about his business and what is keeping him so busy. So how busy would you like to be when you retire? Think about that and leave a comment down below. Let's go over and meet George. Okay, so I'm running a few minutes late to my meetup with George, and this is what I see in front of me. Hopefully it's at the bottom of this hill, not at the top.
My name is George. I live in Sayulita, Mexico. I've lived here this is going to be my 8th year. I don't know about the busiest guy in Sayulita, but at times it certainly feels like that.
So we're going to hear about some of the things that keep George busy, especially one thing that may be of real interest to you if you're thinking about buying a house in Mexico. But we're also going to hear about whether he speaks Spanish and whether he feels safe, and take a tour of his house, which is a gorgeous house. You got to see the view from here. It's a cloudy day today, but it is just a wonderful view from up here. And the climb up here was quite a climb. I just went and had a mezcalita down on the beach, and was running a little bit behind, thought I could pick up the pace, but no, I could not pick up the pace. But let's hear a little bit about George's story, where I like to start, which is before he moved to Mexico and transitioning into moving to Mexico.
So before I moved to Mexico, I was living in Charleston, South Carolina. Lived there for about 25 years. Was a real estate developer in Charleston and had a relatively successful career. And about a little over 8 years ago, decided I wanted to move to Mexico, originally to sort of have a year sabbatical, for lack of a better word, and just sort of change up life a little bit. And came for a year, and then at the end of the year, it felt like I was just getting settled in and that I couldn't leave then. So here it is 8 years later, and I'm still here.
And here is an amazing place, and we're going to take a tour of his house, and we're going to maybe skip a couple things because he did have a big party last night and his maid didn't show up today. So we'll see what we can see. I kind of picture it like The Hangover, like afterwards, after a big party. So in this very, very nice house, but we'll get that tour. But let's go into something like, does he speak Spanish? Because I know I normally cover that a little later in the interview, but we're going to flip things around a little bit.
My Spanish is okay. You know, I'm embarrassed that I've lived here for 8 years and it's not better, but because I live in Sayulita and it's such a heavy sort of immigrant, expat, whatever you want to call it, community, there's a lot of English that's spoken here, but I have made a point of trying to learn Spanish. You know, it's Mexico. Like, Spanish is the language of Mexico. We're guests here in, you know, the Mexican country. I think it's super important to learn, you know, as much as you can. So, yeah, I mean, I can speak Spanish. I can get by. I can have conversations. You know, beers help. And recently, I've sort of, you know, crossed the being able to make a phone call threshold, which isn't easy. You know, if you're calling Telmex or Telcel or trying to schedule an appointment or just whatever on the phone when you're not looking at somebody, you can't see their hand gestures. You can't, you know, read their lips. You can't, you know, it's just kind of a different thing. So recently that's been a small hurdle that I've gotten better at, but you know, I can function in Spanish. Not great, but I can function in Spanish.
Yeah, being able to have a phone call in Spanish, it may not sound like much, but it really is a big deal to go from face-to-face Spanish, where you can see body language and they can see that you're struggling and they can slow down, to just being on the phone with someone. And it's like truly real time. You don't get a lot of time to think. It is a big deal to go from in-person Spanish to on the phone Spanish. But let's dig into kind of the meat of this interview and see what is keeping George busy.
I don't know, just too many things, basically. You know, I developed real estate in Charleston. When I moved down to Mexico, I'm a real estate junkie, so got into the real estate game a little bit, developed some properties, you know, built a couple houses, super active in the community too. You know, I'm on the board of Pro Sayulita, which is kind of a grassroots organization here that helps with things like infrastructure and just issues in the town. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And now I've ended up starting a company called MexEdge, where we help other people like me who have moved down here and are buying or building property. We help them basically lock in exchange rates so that they eliminate their risk associated with currency fluctuation, which sort of killed me on one of my real estate projects. Yeah, I'm probably working a good 50, 60 hours a week on that. Plus, having a family with 2 kids. I've got 2 12-year-olds. That are in school in Puerto Vallarta, and, obviously a wife. And it's just a lot at times. Plus I wouldn't say social animal, but, love to have fun. That's why we live in Mexico. So, you'll catch me at the bars during happy hour after work and socializing a lot with my friends, trying to run my company, trying to, still keep up with my real estate stuff. It's a lot. It's a great place to be doing it.
So clearly I'm talking to someone who doesn't surf, because I can see how people get pulled out into the ocean. So let's ask though, and make sure, do you surf?
No, I actually surf a ton. Had a lot to do with sort of why we chose Sayulita, because there's a couple waves in town. There's great waves sort of in the whole area, but I surf as much as humanly possible. We had a great run of waves over the last couple days. So I surfed this morning before I got to work, or before I went to work. My kids get dropped off at the bus super early because they've got to go all the way into Puerto Vallarta. So I drop them off at 6:45, and I take my board, put it on my golf cart, and drop the kids off at school. And then I go to the beach in the pitch black dark, and I have to wait about 20 minutes on the beach while there's enough light to at least paddle out. So that was about 7:10 this morning, and paddled out, and the waves were firing this morning, super good. So it's probably the best way you could imagine starting off a day, especially for someone like me who's, my days are just crazy, crazy, crazy. So to be able to start the day with that, like in the water, watching the sunrise, it's as good as it gets. It's sort of my only, moment of calm through the whole day, to being able to, do that. So yeah, I love it. Love it.
Okay, so clearly I was wrong on that. But let's hear a little bit more about the business, because this is something that we're going to be doing either a live stream or another video about, and I'll have a link to that if it's available. But let's hear just a little bit now, so you'll get a preview of why he made this business and what it can do for someone like you.
Yeah, so like I said, I was a developer in Charleston before I moved to Mexico. When I moved to Mexico, I'm a junkie in real estate, so started developing some things. And when I was building these 2 houses for, speculative houses that I was going to sell, we were crunching numbers in the beginning of the project, and both houses were going to be around $1 million in construction costs, or so we thought. And then during construction, the peso went from between 21 and 22, roughly, down to under 16 and a half. And during that time, I was funding the construction with US dollars. So, instead of the overall cost being $1 million, it ended up being, $150,000 to $200,000 more due to currency fluctuation. And that's when I sort of just took a deep dive into how to protect yourself against currency fluctuation. And it was like, just for me, trying to solve a specific business problem that I was having personally. And we sort of figured that out. And once I had figured it out, I have a ton of friends who are in real estate, either developers, builders, realtors, and people started, coming to me and asking, hey, I know you sort of figured this out. Can you help me? Either I'm building this house, or, I'm trying to close this deal, but the peso's fluctuating, whatever. So I started helping just friends. And that's sort of when the light bulb went off, was like, what? This is a company. And 2.5 years ago, we started MexEdge basically to, protect people that were in my shoes, like I said before, for people building houses, for buying houses, that are funding it in US dollars, but paying in Mexican pesos. Just sort of a quick example. If you're buying a house in Puerto Vallarta and it's 10 million pesos and the peso is at 20, that is going to be $500,000, right? But closings in Mexico can take a long time, sometimes 2, 3, even 4+ months. In preventas, they can take 2 years. And that's a lot of time to sort of be exposed to currency risk. So, between the time that you sign your contract to the time you close, if the peso goes from 20 for that, $10 million house down to 18, that same house is now going to cost you, 55 grand more. Instead of 500 grand, now it's costing 555 grand. So we sort of came in to solve that problem because there were so many people that, have that issue when they're buying things in Mexico. So we've solved the problem. And now that's basically all I do is help people, like me, who are in my shoes, or friends, or, obviously tons of clients now. We've been around for a while, but that's kind of the gist of it.
Now, one thing to note, because Kat and I have been on in different parts of the real estate transaction. So some real estate sells in US dollars, and the transaction happens completely outside Mexico. So if you're buying from another gringo, you might be buying in US dollars, so this doesn't matter. But construction, which we're dealing with now, is in Todos Santos, is usually done in pesos. Pre-construction properties usually done in pesos. If you're working with a Mexican, they're selling in pesos. So it is a huge risk. And we're seeing it ourselves as we're building this house in Todos Santos, that the numbers that we used when we first started, because this year has been a bad year for the US dollar, those numbers are not the same numbers as we're starting to pay out the checks. So it's getting more expensive, even though the builder gave us a set cost. Those set costs are in pesos. But I'm going to switch gears right now. And George mentioned that he has kids here. So I want to talk really briefly about having kids in Mexico, because that's definitely keeping him busy. So it's kind of along the same lines, but let's hear a little bit about having kids down here.
It's funny you bring that up, because I have one of the things that keeps me busy that we were talking about before. I have a podcast. I'm the co-host of a podcast with Mexico News Daily with my friend Travis, who's the CEO and owner. And the whole second season of our podcast is geared toward exactly that question, which is, what's it like sort of, raising kids in Mexico? There's so many people that move here and they're younger, digital nomads. There's so many retirees that move here. And there's a lot of, content out there that, discusses those types of people. But there's also, now, not now, but more so now, a ton of families that move here with their kids, and people want to know sort of what that's like, raising a family here. And that's basically what season 2 of our podcast is dedicated to. But that wasn't your question, but I had to get a plug in there. But
it's great. Thanks.
It's been super cool raising my kids here. That had a lot sort of to do with us actually moving. It wasn't just surfing. When I lived in Charleston, I sort of could look in a mirror, and if I didn't make that change to do something or move somewhere, I sort of knew exactly where my life was going to be in 10 years. And that sort of scared me, and I didn't want my kids necessarily growing up in that kind of, white suburbia environment. And Charleston's an amazing city. Like, I'm not dissing Charleston. And I love the US too. I mean, it's a phenomenal country. So I'm not dissing the US either. I just wanted my kids to have a different, more worldly experience. I wanted them to, understand that growing up in, Charleston or a suburb of Charleston, isn't necessarily the norm globally, right? I mean, I decided, we'll move here, and they moved when they were 4 years old, and now they are 12. They're going to middle school in Puerto Vallarta, and I think, it's kind of an experiment, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but so far, 8 years in, I think it's going incredibly well. My kids love it here. They speak perfect Spanish. Unlike me, they have no problem making phone calls. They've been educated here in Mexico, and they've gone to amazing schools here, and they love this life. They've spent, more of their life in Mexico than in the States. And I don't know, I'm like oddly proud of that. I think that's super cool, especially because my kids are like towhead blonde. They look like, little mini surfer kids. And then when they go to speak Spanish, and their Spanish is like perfect, everybody trips out about it. So the experiment is sort of still ongoing, but so far I think it's been a huge success, and it's been, not only sort of a success, but I think it's also changed not only their whole mindset, but also sort of my mindset about education and kids and what they do in life. And by that I mean, when we moved here, I thought the fact that we had kids in school in Mexico for a couple of years would be a great thing to help them get into like a good college in the States, that they spoke great Spanish, and it would just be a good sort of thing on their resume, for lack of a better word, that they had done. And now I look at it totally differently. Now I'm like, well, why would they go to the States for college? They could go to UNAM in Mexico City, which is, one of the best universities in Latin America. They could go to Europe. They could go to South Africa. They could go sort of anywhere. And I think like that now, like, globally and more worldly, versus had they just gone to school in the States. And in the States, it's just sort of a rat race. And it starts at like kindergarten, right? People freak out over, oh my God, if my kid doesn't get into this school in kindergarten, we're doomed, and he's never going to get into this school. And then, college, forget about it, it's never going to happen, which is just crazy. Like, we don't think like that here. None of my friends think like that. It's just, we're opening our kids' eyes to a much different experience that will then translate into what they end up doing later in life. I'm not saying they wouldn't go back to school in the States for college or something. I'm not opposed to that at all, but it's just broadened our horizons on how we think of all that. So, looking back on it now, granted, I said it was sort of an experiment, but right now the experiment is going well, and I couldn't imagine it any other way.
So one of the questions I love to ask people is, do they feel safe? And in this instance, it's, do you feel safe for your wife and kids along with yourself?
Yeah, not only do I feel safe here, I feel just as safe, if not safer, than I do in the States. I also don't worry specifically about my kids. Even in Charleston, which is a small city, there's always the worry of school shootings and just all the crap that's going on in the States right now. And that's just not an issue here at all. So I feel incredibly safe. The other thing is, when you grow up here as a kid, sort of in this sort of smaller environment, whatever, you just, I don't want to say grow up faster, but you just have different life skills than you would have in the States, meaning they speak two languages. They understand how two different cultures work. I have no problem, with my kids walking around town by themselves, granted, and they're still young. They're only 12, but I have no problems with that. In the States, I probably feel the same, but when they got a little bit older, maybe I wouldn't want them, taking the train or the bus into some city by themselves. But here, because of sort of what they've been exposed to and, just how they sort of interact with the world, I just think they're on like a maturity level that's just higher, much higher than they would be at in the States. So, in that sense, I'm actually much, I feel that they're just sort of much safer because they have like street smarts. They have, they've been socialized differently. They understand the world sort of on a different level than kids at their age in the States do. That was a long-winded answer. I apologize, but there's just such a difference between kids that grow up here and kids that grow up in the States or in, potentially other countries.
Yeah, the kids down here just seem so happy. The Mexican kids, the foreign kids. It really is something special to expose your kids to international living while they're still young. But I'm going to switch gears now, and we're going to take a tour of this gorgeous house.
All right, welcome to my humble abode. I'm going to apologize in advance. We had a big party here last night and the housekeeper didn't show up today. My wife would be mortified if she knew that I was giving people a tour of the house when it looked like this, so I apologize in advance. So this is basically kitchen, living room, dining room. Super open, big windows, breeze. Obviously the views are pretty great. Off the kitchen, we've got a big pantry. That's a complete disaster. Half bath off of the kitchen. Living room. Interestingly enough, we've never had a TV before, but I just got the big TV because I went to Vanderbilt and the Vanderbilt Commodores football was actually good for the first time and since I went to college and I'm old, so now we have a TV to watch Vanderbilt football. Stairs going downstairs, then here is the master. Again, it's a disaster, I apologize, but view from the master's fantastic. I don't want to rub it in, but sometimes we'll wake up and look out the window and you'll see whales out in the ocean from your bed, which is kind of nice. Then here's our master closet. Kind of a nightmare, but big, nice master closet. Not very clean. And master bath, shower. And that's it for the master. And then we've got downstairs, we've got 3 bedrooms, sort of. It's 2 bedrooms and like the kids' playroom, which is the 3rd bedroom, but right now it's set up like a playroom. And then a bathroom, so here's our twins' room. Again, views are super nice. 12-year-old twins are 12-year-old twins, so it looks like a disaster. Then we've got our guest room. We also have a casita downstairs, but there's a guest in the casita, so we can't really show that, but this is where our guests will stay if the casita's rented or somebody else is using it. Then the bathroom down here for the kids. And then this is sort of the 3rd bedroom that's basically turned into the kids' playroom. So Legos and crap everywhere. And then laundry room, especially with a rental unit downstairs, it's kind of important to have a big laundry room here because we go through tons of towels and blankets and everything else you can imagine. That's my dog, Bolillo, and the cat, Lupita. Oh, that's my son, Koki's. Hi, bud. How was school? Ooh. Good? Yeah. Meet Brighton. He's giving a tour of our house. So he just got back from the bus. He was dropped off at 6:45 in the morning, and it is now 5:10, and he's been there all day. So it's a super long day for him. Like I said, there's a casita downstairs. We can't really go in there now, but then upstairs is the palapa, which is kind of the best place in the house. That's where we'll film, whatever. So this is the palapa up here. One interesting thing which is kind of weird is because people always ask about like square footage in Mexico, right? And in the States, square footage is only heated and cooled square footage. But in Mexico, it's sort of different because there's so much outdoor living that basically if it has a roof above it, people will consider it square footage. Whereas in the States, this would never count as square footage. It's just an open area. But here it does, sort of. So yeah, ping pong table, hammock, big couch, barbecue. View's fantastic up here. You can see the waves that I was surfing this morning. They were fantastic. And then we'll just go look. I'll show you the garage from up above so we don't have to walk all the way down there. Con cuidado. And then underneath the pool in the kids' room where we were before, all the way down there, that's where the casita is, which is nice having it, you know, all the way down there because it's super separate, right? Mm-hmm. So casita guests never really, you know, they're just not in the sort of main house. And then that structure down there is the garage. And then on top of the garage, that palapa roof, is my wife's studio. She makes jewelry, which is actually heavenly. That's one of my favorite parts of the house.
So we're back up here on the rooftop now, and we're going to get George's tip that is perfect just for you.
You know, that's a great question. Having lived here for so long, I have so many tips for people, right? Because, you know, with time comes experience. But I sort of think the biggest tip that or advice I would give somebody is sort of, if you're thinking about a move, whether it's Mexico or not, but just a big sort of international move or a change of scenery, just do it. You know, for me, it was the greatest decision I've ever made in my life. I can't imagine where my life would be had I sort of not, you know, made this huge decision and moved down here. And it's been the most enriching, you know, just awesome experience for me and my family. So I think sort of my tip is, if you're curious about it or potentially thinking about it, you know, just go for it. Even if it sucks, it's not going to suck. But even if it sucks, you're still going to learn a shitload. You're going to, you know, even from bad experiences, you still learn. It still sort of creates who you are, and it's just worth it. And go for it. Stop making excuses. And I'm not talking about just Mexico. I'm talking about anywhere. Just take the risk. It will always pay off.
Well, y'all know that I love that advice of just do it. Stop thinking about it. Make it happen. If it doesn't work out, you can always reverse course. It's not the end of the world. Just don't spend every single penny that you have. Make sure you make smart decisions so that you can back out if you need to. And if you don't need to, you've got lots of money for pickleball and different surfboards and things like that. So I've got that video with George. If we have it available, it will be the one that's specifically diving into his business. Otherwise, I've got videos with other foreigners down here. And from Sayulita, wish you were here. Hasta luego.